Well, right now, the United States Department of Justice and the son of the President of the United States, Robert Hunter Biden, have no deal. That's what was just stated in court. Both sides are taking a 10-minute recess right now to see if they can agree to terms on the plea agreement. Starting about 11 a.m., the judge started to question whether or not a provision in the agreements, this pretrial diversion on the gun charge, and as well, and we're just finding this out now, and I asked the audience patience with this because we haven't been able to see these court documents today. But apparently, as part of the pretrial diversion agreement for the gun charge that Hunter Biden faces, there are additional tax charges that are covered in that, meaning that they won't be brought should he abide by the terms of that pretrial diversion agreement. The judge questions that and says, look, the pretrial diversion agreement is outside of my purview, but yet it's referenced in the plea agreement, between the two parties. And she questioned the government and said, you're asking me to approve and accept this plea agreement, but yet I've got this pretrial diversion that's hanging out there. And is it your understanding, Hunter Biden, that, you know, if there's some sort of a break in the agreement here, are you willing to still move forward as far as the difference between the pretrial diversion agreement and the plea agreement? Hunter Biden said, no, Your Honor. The two sides meet at exactly 11 a.m. Chris Clark, who represents Hunter Biden, goes over to the prosecution. The judge took a 10-minute recess there, and he said, and this is a quote, "We'll rip it up. We'll tear up this agreement right then." The two sides got back together again after that 10, 15-minute recess and said, look, we agree now that the pretrial diversion is separate from all of this. And with respect to the plea agreement, the only reason why we reference this pretrial diversion agreement is just to say that when you cut to sentencing guidelines, which is this idea of what eventually sentence Hunter Biden should get for the misdemeanor tax offenses, that you can't include the gun charge into that. Everything seemed to be okay at that point. But then the judge asked, look, there's an ongoing investigation here. Government says yes. They agree. They say, what does that ongoing investigation involve? They say they can't talk about it. And they said, okay, so you're asking me to accept a plea agreement, but does that cover any potential charges? And she referenced the work that Hunter Biden has done for entities in foreign countries. And she said, does this preclude you from bringing FARA charges in the future if I accept this plea agreement? And the government said, no, we could bring those charges. The defense, Chris Clark, acting on behalf of Hunter Biden, disagreed with that and said, no, that's not my understanding of the agreement. And then the federal prosecutors said, there's no deal. That was at 11:31. And Chris Clark, who represents Hunter Biden, says, as far as I'm concerned, the plea agreement is null and void. Just as I left the courtroom itself, the judge determined that there should be a 10-minute recess to try and figure out whether or not the two parties can quickly come to an agreement. Otherwise, the trial clock is on. As I was leaving the courtroom, she was talking about status conferences, future filings, as if there was no plea agreement at all, as if the very reason why we were here today does not exist. So as I stand here, I'm just looking at my clock to make sure, that they're not back in. As I stand here, there is no current plea deal